Hello there, I'm the Serial Plagiarist, and welcome to what will probably be one of my longest video series for the time being. Today, we're talking about the acclaimed Star Wars Republic, published by Dark Horse Comics from 1998 to 2006. Well, actually, I know this video says Star Wars Republic, but we're actually talking about a whole load of the prequel era comics alongside the main Star Wars Republic series. So that includes stuff like Jango Fett Open Seasons, and the General Grievous comics and so on and so forth. This won't be every prequel comic ever. A bunch of stuff will be omitted, such as the comics related to the micro series, and stuff related to Dave Filoni's mess, and stuff that isn't canon, like Tag and Bink. Perhaps those will come at a later time. I'm basing my review off of the Star Wars Epic Collection, which is a compilation put together by Disney for the old EU comics, I guess as a way to make a little bit of money off of it. Thankfully, they compiled everything in chronological order, so this review will be based on the comics in order of which they appear. So the material included the 3 stages of the prequel trilogy, which is everything preluding and up to the Phantom Menace, titled Rise of the Sith, then the period in between the Phantom Menace and Attack of the Clones, titled The Menace Revealed, and then of course, the period in between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith, titled simply The Clone Wars. In the Epic Collection compilations, there's around 10 volumes if we combine all 3 periods of the prequel trilogy combined, which is just insane. So yeah, there's a lot of material to go through, and since I didn't want to talk about the spin-off shit later, I decided I would talk about it as much as I could around the prequel comics. So one last thing before we begin. I'm not actually doing every single issue of Republic. The content that are actually about the transitional period from Republic to Empire will be saved for later. So don't expect me to talk about Star Wars Republic issues 78 and 79, as they take place after Revenge of the Sith, and they're not included in the prequel epic collections anyways. Alright, now that we've got everything worth noting, let's go on our Lord of the Rings journey from the years before the Phantom Menace to the end of Revenge of the Sith. Are you ready?
Let's go!
So the first thing we'll be looking at are short stories from Star Wars Tales issue 13 concerning Mace Windu. To be honest, I don't really like Star Wars Tales at all, and if I had to describe why, it's probably because they have stories that are too short and aren't really interesting. They seem really trivial, like it's something Forrest Gump could just as easily describe on a bench next to anyone who would listen. So yeah, so far, this compilation is not off to a good start. And it's not like these specific short stories alleviate my criticisms. The first story, titled Stones, leaves me pretty empty. It's basically a short explanation on where Mace Windu got his purple lightsaber. Behind the scenes, we all know that it's Samuel L. Jackson's favorite color, and he pleaded his case to George Lucas to have one, but it's explained here that he was gifted his purple crystal while out on a mission to a world named Hurricane, located in the Outer Rim. While it could be an interesting story of being sent on a mission in his younger years, again, it's almost just like a brief overview. I thought it was kind of a waste. Who spoils the opportunity to tell the story of how Mace Windu built his lightsaber with the semi-unique color that comes along with it? Apparently this story. There was so much potential, but I was left feeling empty by such an afterthought of a short story. Next we've got Survivors, which is another short story about how Mace Windu tracked down a near-human dictator who thought he had gotten away with murder. He mind tricks 2 guards to let himself in, confronts the killer, and when he resists arrest, he is killed by the Jedi Master. The end. Again, too short to be developed or interesting. The one afterwards is probably the most interesting, but that's not saying much. It's called Children in the Force, and it concerns a little story about the Order's newest initiates as infants. Depa Billaba, Windu's very apprentice, the one who will go down the dark path in Shatterpoint, asks her master about faint memories she has about her parents, who she assumes are her parents, and she's been thinking about the faces she saw. But Mace Windu tells her that such distractions must be rid of if she wants to become a Jedi Knight. It expands a lot on how newborns enter the Jedi Order. They're taken from their families at a young age for training to devoid themselves of all attachments they could have to their parents. After leaving the infant wing and whatnot, a Zeltron bounty hunter comes in, taking one of the children, only to be intercepted by Mace Windu. After a scuffle, the bounty hunter reveals that she was hired by the infant's parents because the parents want their kid back. Yeah, turns out the parents changed their mind. We also learn that the Jedi mostly refuse to give back the children to their parents if asked, because by that point, they've already been adapted to Jedi training, or at least the first stage. The final page actually has Mace Windu get a message on his datapad from his own parents asking to see him just once, and Mace actively chooses to delete this message. Now this short story obviously could be more developed, but as it exists, it's the one that's probably the closest to making you think about things. Giving up your child to an organization like the Jedi would be a big decision to make, and you're bound to be prone to changing your mind. But by that point, it'll be too late. Now the last story, The Secret of Tet Army, again, would probably make for an interesting story if it wasn't so damn short. This story concerns Mace Windu traveling to a planet in which there's an archaeological site being uncovered. The site is in memory of an entity known as the Time Warrior, who defended the inhabitants from a plague of beasts around 4,000 years ago. Mace Windu travels there and goes into the site with an orb that's been recently uncovered. Inside he finds a statue of himself and the orb starts to glow. Upon putting the orb on the statue's hand, he is shot back in time, in which he completes the legend of the Time Warrior, with him being it, and around 4 days later of defending and being revered, he's suddenly shot back to when he began, and later tells the story to the Jedi Council, who determine it is a time paradox, in which Windu was always destined to become the Time Warrior. You might expect me to be angry at this story because I've expressed that I am very against Ahsoka's bullshit time travel survival, but given this is an inconsequential short story, I am more forgiving. Plus the fact that this was a predestination paradox. I wish this story was more developed though. Perhaps more time to expand on the orb that caused the time travel, and Mace Windu's time in the past would be welcome for a more interesting story. Mace Windu ironically became the first Star Wars time traveler through a time paradox. With that being said, however, these are all the Star Wars Tales stories relating to Mace Windu. So what's next? Well, after that, we've got even more Star Wars tales. However, this one relates to Yaddle, titled The One Below. I knew somewhat about this story via a lore video, but actually reading it for myself is a different experience. Before Tales of the Jedi Filoni knockoff edition absolutely butchered the character through an absolutely nothing episode that wasn't even about her, we actually get the full backstory and history of this background Jedi from the Phantom Menace. The story starts in the years before the Phantom Menace, in which Yaddle has returned to the Jedi after over a century. As the story goes, Yaddle was the apprentice of a Jedi named Pulvin Kutt, sent on a mission alongside Yaddle to liberate galactic colonies from a warlord named Tulak. He intended to work with the resistance movement, but was betrayed very early on, before he even made it to where he intended to go. And right off the bat, Tulak was baiting Pulvin, since he had killed his parents, and egging him on for revenge, and eventually, that anger and revenge got the best of Pulvin, and left his apprentice Yaddle to pay the price. Right off the bat, I like the introduction to the short story. While it is mostly narration, the comics art brilliantly presents the story, and I got glued to this story right away. Pulvin is mostly used for Yaddle's misfortune, in which Tulak has Yaddle strapped to a chair, where Yaddle, defiant as ever, is tortured by Tulak. This is where things get from bad to worse. An enslaved local has to bring Yaddle the bad news that she's going to be buried under a pit and left forgotten. Yeah, she was sent down to a pit, in which she faced confinement, never seeing the outside world, and stayed in that state for 200 years. Ouch. However, during all this, her will was never broken. She instead repeated her master's final lesson in her head over and over again, and she began to live with her new way of life. One fateful day after those 200 years, an earthquake came, and the now impoverished and forgotten descendants of the colony had their way of life destroyed. But Yaddle was finally able to climb up and escape at last. However, her relief was short-lived. After adjusting to the sunlight in the first time in 2 centuries, she had saw the destruction of the earthquake. She had long since forgiven those who kept her locked away, and made it her mission to help the descendants rebuild. Yaddle became the world's hero, as she guided the former colony out of the natural disaster. The modern Jedi even learned of her escape and offered her passage back, but Yaddle refused until the colony was fully restored. This is where a monument was built on the area where Pulvin had lost his life. Eventually, the son of Tulak returned to the world, intending to conquer it as his father had before him, although this time, Yaddle was there, fully ready and prepared. She quickly took down Tulak's son and told him in his final moments about how long ago she told his father that his grip over these people will end and he will die in fear. Now we cut back to the present, in which the Jedi Council assess Yaddle's actions, and literally everybody except Yoda, interestingly enough, agrees to promote Yaddle from Padawan into a Master. She went above and beyond, and acted as a Jedi should, despite the terrible hell she went through. The decision is made, and Yaddle is welcomed back into the Order with a double promotion. Now, I didn't spend a lot of time discussing my thoughts on this short story, but I actually think it's quite good. It's an interesting origin story to the background character. Yaddle as the protagonist is shown going through a journey, albeit abridged. And it's actually kind of inspirational the way it's told. I mean, think about it. She was locked away in isolation for 200 years. Even if you want to condense it down to Yoda's species years and say that it's around 20, it's still a long time being locked away. Jolie Bindo may have been in the Shadowlands of Kashyyyk for around 20 years, but that was by choice. Yaddle's will, however, was never broken, and she never lost hope, and that eventually paid off. And even when she was free, she chose to stay and help the local community, as a Jedi should. She did not accept any honors on top of that. She was utterly selfless in the face of darkness, and yeah, she sure earned her promotion from Padawan to Master. Take cues, Anakin.
What?
I actually heard expanded universe-wise, Anakin greatly looked up to Yaddle before her death. Anyways, that's enough of that story. Now we can move on to the next thing. In this case, it's actually issues from the mainline Star Wars Republic series. It's worth noting, however, that back then, it was actually named simply Star Wars, maybe with a stapled on Dark Horse Comics in brackets. Not to be confused with the original Marvel comics of the same name. At least at the time. I'm still going to call it Star Wars Republic, because how else do we make a distinction? In this case, it's Star Wars Republic issues 4 to 6, a 3-parter known as Vow of Justice. Yes, we're going out of release order when it comes to the mainline series. The reason why is simple. It's easier to just do everything in chronological order. The Epic Collection does it that way, and so we will do it the way it's set forth. Besides, issues 4 to 6 are a direct prequel to issues 0 to 3, so it's no big deal. When it comes to prequel Jedi, Ki-Adi-Mundi is actually the first we were ever introduced to, as he made his first appearance in the December 1998 debut of Star Wars Republic. So yeah, that's right, the Mr. Potato Head Jedi is the OG prequel Jedi. Anyways, as I said, it probably doesn't matter if you read issues 4 to 6 first anyways. You look at the front cover, and it's a young Ki-Adi-Mundi being bossed around by a Miss Potato Head. Yeah, I could make all the Toy Story jokes in a book. Anyways, the issue starts with Ki-Adi-Mundi returning to his homeworld Saria after 20 years or so, having been trained directly under Master Yoda, and we get a flashback to the day he was inducted into the Jedi Order. As a boy, he was discovered by a Jedi who landed on Saria who wished to see him. While it's not stated in this issue, key species the Sarians have a terrible gender birth ratio, with 1 male to 20 females. Since boys were exceptionally rare, the Mundis were overjoyed with having a boy. However, he was always at risk of being taken away by Sarian raiders. The only other male in Mundi's family was, of course, his father. His other siblings were all girls. The Jedi that arrived at the Mundi's place explained that Ki-Adi-Mundi was strong in the Force and needed some training. He was already past the initial years of training. Ki, due to a Force premonition, tells his dad that the raiders are coming, and so there isn't much choice. Ki is forced to hide as the Sarian raiders barge in. It's explained that the raiders do not know that the Mundi family has a son, and if they find out they do, he will be taken as a tribute. After the raiders leave, Key's father makes the hard decision to give his son up to the Jedi Order, and the hope is that one day he will return and purge the Sarean Raiders. Now this is quite a strong start. To be honest, the highlights of Star Wars Republic come later during the Clone Wars, but for this, it's a pretty strong start. The comic shows excellently the perilous life Ki-Adi-Mundi lives, having to be hidden by his family to avoid being taken away, and his father knows that if he keeps trying to hide him, he will be caught eventually and taken away. That's why Jedi training is probably the best option, honestly. Perhaps one day, Ki can return and take out the Raiders, restoring peace and justice to Saria. What a way to characterize and humanize a supporting character who in the films only was merely a meme, being wrong about Count Dooku being a murderer, and being concerned with the droid attack on the Wookiees. The comics actually contextualize a lot about who Ki-Adi-Mundi is with his tragic origin. Ki-Adi-Mundi becomes a prominent character in Star Wars Republic, or at least the early issues, although he isn't forgotten about in the later ones. I was really touched by Key's reaction to being taken away by the Jedi. He swears to his father that he will be big and strong enough to stand up to the Raiders, and they'll be sorry. Cut to around 20 years later, and Ki-Adi-Mundi is a young man, with a decent amount of training, being sent back to Saria. Master Yoda, before he leaves, reminds him what he's there for: justice, not revenge. We see through Key's response that he's been told this a million times over. Yoda remarks that it is incredibly important why. Because justice is the fruit of compassion. Revenge, however, is the fruit of hatred. So right off the bat, without knowing anything about Ki-Adi-Mundi beyond the movies, I'm fully invested in his story here. He didn't do much in the films, but it's here where the purpose of the external source material shines ever so brightly. Key does ask Yoda how he's not supposed to hate the Raider leader Bin Garda Zon for what he did to his father and his family. Yoda responds with, quote, "Hate the act, but pity the being. Lost his battle with the dark side he has." As such, Key returns home. Upon seeing his family again, he tells them all about what he's been doing as a Jedi, his hard, intensive training under Master Yoda, and how the unrivaled power of the Force will bring justice to their world. While the illustration could be better, as I'm assessing this arc, it has really grown on me. I'll be honest, when I first read the early issues of Star Wars Republic, I had a bit of a problem with the format and presentation. But now that I'm reading them again, they really have improved with a follow-up read. I guess there's a difference between reading a story for the first time on the surface level and diving deep into the logistics of how the comic is written, illustrated, and presented. Anyways, Key speaks to his father, in which he asks about the main raider, Bin Garda, the one he's grown to hate so much. His father responds that Bin Garda no longer rides, but the raiders are still a problem, forces their demands upon them, and it is said they camp up near a hill, in which he lives like a king, claiming 100 wives for himself and so forth. Key knows that his lightsaber and the Force are the only allies he needs for this job, and so he's off. He goes in with a basic plan, which tells us that he thought this entire confrontation through. He will pose as a drifter and challenge Bin Garda first-hand in combat, and only after he is defeated will he reveal his identity as a Jedi. Yeah, well, things have changed a lot in his absence. When he walks into the camp and challenges the Raider Chief, turns out that Bin Garda isn't Chief anymore, and hasn't been for a long while. Instead, it's this woman, who remarks that she bested Bin Garda years ago, and as an indication, points to Bin Garda being forced to do the menial task of tending to some farm animals. His eyes have gone hollow, his muscles weakened, and now he exists as a shell of a man, although Key doesn't feel bad for him in the slightest. But Key's plan has gone astray, as the new chief gets Key tied by his hands, and Key is unable to concentrate due to the image of the now useless Bin Garda, and the chief bests him easily and now he's a prisoner. When Key awakes, he feels a pain in his ribs, and when he regains awareness, it's Bin Garda, pissed that he's the laughing stock of the Raiders, and intends to kill Ki-Adi-Mundi while he's tied up. Although Key uses the Force to unbind his ropes, and has Bin Garda at a chokehold, remarking that he's shocked, but hardly disappointed. This is where Key reveals that he's a Jedi as the Raiders barge in. This time, Ki is ready, and he in turn easily bests the chief after she refuses to surrender. With that being said, he demands the raiders disband and cease their harassment of the farmers, and they all decide to concede, all except Bingada, who tries his luck and tries throwing a knife at Ki, who, with zero effort, redirects the knife to the side. He realizes that the greatest punishment for Bingada is the fate he's found himself in. He's weak, pathetic, and insignificant. He deactivates his lightsaber to leave Bingada as the shell of what he once was. He returns home at dawn and smells breakfast towards his home. The end. So in summary, this was a simple yet effective story. I can see the symbolism of Ki's trial as a Jedi upon returning to his homeworld. He came in indecisive of whether he was out for justice or revenge. But as fate would have it, he found Bingada in a state where nothing he could do would be as effective as just leaving him as he is. Karma caught up with him, and it's best to just leave him in the state he's in. With that being said, it's a nice short story that displays the origin story of Ki-Adi-Mundi, a soon-to-be recurring character throughout the prequel trilogy, and the comics. So next in line, the collection includes the 5-part storyline Star Wars Jedi The Dark Side, which is a story I hear ties into the Jedi Apprentice novels, and sheds backstory on one of the characters from those novels, Xanatos, who according to Wikipedia, is Qui-Gon Jinn's second apprentice. There's also Femor, who is Qui-Gon's first, who when this story starts, is already a Jedi Knight. Qui-Gon's 2 apprentices are engaged with a 2-on-1 sparring match against him. After the match, Qui-Gon remarks that he's incredibly proud of Femor, and that Master Yoda will inevitably let him train his own apprentice. But Qui-Gon is less encouraging towards Xanatos, because as he says, he displays much aggression, and did not speak as a Jedi. Qui-Gon does try to spin it more positively, by telling his current apprentice that perhaps if he was that openly willing to take the fall for a sparring ally, that it might display selflessness, and a Jedi's life is sacrifice after all. One of Qui-Gon's close friends, Master Tal, walks in, and informs the both of them that there is a crisis on Telos 4. And as it turns out, that is Xanatos' homeworld. After a brief introduction of 2 characters, Derakai and Nason, the latter of which is Xanatos' sister. Yeah, I'll get into this in a bit. The Jedi Council assigned Qui-Gon Jinn, Xanatos, Tal, and another Padawan, Tamarick, who is a Twi'lek, to this mission. In the briefing, there's been a suspected political assassination of a high priestess, and Telos is on the brink of civil war, so the Jedi as peacekeepers must deal with it, and the 4 are specifically assigned to do so. Xanatos in particular is far from pleased. In fact, he's quite angry, and this will be a running theme. Xanatos is a hot-tempered individual, and as you might expect, eggs dangerously close to the dark side. We see that he really does not want to go back home, as he questions the council, asking why they can't send a diplomat or someone like Master Dooku. Although Yoda responds that if Xanatos doesn't go, he will be assigned a new mentor immediately. He must face the mission he's been assigned, whether he likes it or not. It's a Jedi's duty. Another Jedi, Micah Geert, asks Yoda if Xanatos is ready for this difficult mission. And we see that Yoda assigning him to this mission meant that it's to prove whether he is worthy of becoming a Jedi. We see right off the bat that Qui-Gon struggles to work with his apprentice, as Xanatos expresses fury that they're sending him back to Telos. And all Qui-Gon can tell him is that he has to face his weaknesses, which of course doesn't help. It's not strong inspirational advice, and it gives the impression that Qui-Gon doesn't know what to say to Xanatos. Anyways, the 4 of them jump into hyperspace for the Telos system. We see how well Qui-Gon and Tal get along. I hear in Jedi Apprentice, Qui-Gon actually had feelings for her, but that's all in the book series. But it can be guessed here as well. As soon as they make it to the atmosphere of Telos, they're immediately shot down. Upon crash landing, the 4 of them are attacked by a group of strangers, who blast at them without question. Xanatos finds himself unarmed, but disobeys Qui-Gon and rushes at the thugs head on. Yeah, I was really reminded of Attack of the Clones Anakin here. So far, I see a bunch of similarities, like the fact that they're both familiar with their background. This is especially prevalent when the thugs are killed by the Telos guard, and the leader Creon is in fact Xanatos' father. You can see, however, that Xanatos is not pleased to see his dad, and that's actually how issue 1 ends. To be honest, I didn't find the comic miniseries all that interesting, but upon rereading it and critically assessing it, it's more interesting the second time. It seems to be the case with a lot of comics. I don't enjoy them the first time, but upon rereading them, they grow on me. Anyways, we pick up where we left off on issue 2. Qui-Gon has to remind Xanatos to keep his emotions in check. Xanatos alludes to how his father gave him away to the Jedi Order, and so one can make an inference to why he's so pissed. I think we can empathize with Xanatos based on how he's presented. It's a similar reason to why I held sympathy for Anakin Skywalker in Attack of the Clones. We also see right afterwards that Xanatos is not all a hothead. We see he's skilled in technology, as he rewires some cables to make one of the guards with a visor see himself. Qui-Gon prefers Xanatos when he's happier like this. Then we cut to Daikori and Nason. The former asks the latter if she's seen her brother yet. She says no, and we actually get a good look at Daikori. It's not illustrated the best, but if you look closely, Daikori has some burns and a charred face. Meanwhile, Creon speaks to his son Xanatos and tells him that he knows a nearby rival system to Telos, Top Rawa, is behind the assassination of the High Priestess, and he wants his son to prove it. He tries suggesting that he has a duty to his homeworld, but Xanatos says that his duty is to his master, and he excuses himself to leave, remarking that he senses that his master needs him. So yeah, a strained relationship with his father is the main takeaway. You can see that Xanatos is going to be pushed further and further in the wrong direction. So upon arriving to the crime scene, we see that Telosian citizens don't think very highly of the Jedi, and they have to be ignored. So basically sensing around the crime scene, Xanatos suggests that maybe the High Priestess was old and clumsily fell off. There isn't much evidence of foul play on the surface. Qui-Gon understands where his apprentice is coming from, but still encourages everyone to use the Force. And that's where Tamrick, reaching out, senses that an unknown man pushed the priestess off to her death. She collapses right afterwards, and Qui-Gon figures out that a Jedi had some hand in the murder, despite not knowing how. After a scene of Master Tal being attacked by a group of insurgents, we cut to the Grand Citadel Station, which still exists after all these years, in which the priestess's funeral is held. The Lord welcomes all the Jedi, alluding to Telos' past history with the Jedi, and Xanatos is as miserable as ever. Now, part of Tal's mission to Telos was also to take Tamrick on as her Padawan, although she openly states to Qui-Gon that she isn't quite ready to have an apprentice, before she's about to tell him about the insurgents she met today. On Xanatos' side, he tells Tamrick to be careful who she speaks to, since apparently Telosians only speak to non-humans when they have to. A cool reference here is how Xanatos references how after the Sith destroyed Telos long ago, the Ithorians had to build it from the ground up. Xanatos, after being a bit racist for a bit, is told by Tamrick that he's in the presence of his sister. Oof. Meanwhile, Tal tells Qui-Gon that one of the insurgents was dressed like an Antaran Ranger, and fled as soon as she confronted him. And since apparently a Ranger never runs, he had something to hide. Okay, to be honest, the story is somewhat hard to keep track of on a casual read. You do have to be paying extra attention in my opinion. I guess it's because there's a lot introduced throughout the story, and it's not as straightforward as it could be. I remember the first time reading this comic, I was somewhat confused. Comics can be a breeze to read, but other times they can really be convoluted. So while I like the characterization of the relationship between Qui-Gon and Xanatos, I dislike the structure of the comic series itself. To continue with the story, Qui-Gon speaks to Lord Creon, in which they talk about Xanatos. When Qui-Gon says that Xanatos has an internal wound from Telos and his family, from the rejection, Creon objects that he never rejected his son. Then Qui-Gon references the Antaran Rangers, which are apparently allies to the Jedi. And that's what I mean when I say this is hard to follow. We get another scene with Daikori and Nason, and I actually have to say that Daikori sort of reminded me of Harvey Dent in The Dark Knight based on how he looks. And to be honest, because of how the comic was structured, I struggled to get through this story. And I basically had to look on Wikipedia for the details on what happened. So basically, based on what Wikipedia said, Creon was the one who had the High Priestess assassinated, using Decory, his daughter's lover, to do so. He intended to blame the rival system Top Rawa for the assassination. Basically, to make a long story short, Nason and Creon himself get killed by insurgents, and on Qui-Gon and Xanatos' side, Xanatos fails his final test as a Padawan, and as the title shows, he fell to the dark side while trying to deal with the crisis on Telos. Towards the end, he disappears from plain sight, and Qui-Gon, once he realizes he had a failed Padawan, disregards his previous successful Padawan, and he believes he failed Xanatos, all of which plays into the Jedi Apprentice series. I also heard that the fact that Qui-Gon had an apprentice before Xanatos was also a retcon. And the comic explains that he outright ignored his success with his first Padawan, which is why he was never mentioned. I guess another criticism I have, besides the structure of the story, is that Xanatos looks too much like Obi-Wan in The Phantom Menace. And in fact, when I first saw him, I thought it was Obi-Wan. And it became really hard to differentiate him once they clarified he was actually ironically Qui-Gon's Padawan before Obi-Wan, which was really weird. I also don't know what the point of Tamrick being there was, since I checked, and she's not in the Jedi Apprentice series. So all in all, I didn't really know what to say about Star Wars Jedi: The Dark Side. The 5-issue miniseries was pretty confusing and convoluted to me. Based on what I did understand of the comic, I think the most constructive way of improving the comic is to make everything more straightforward. I think a more fleshed out introduction for Xanatos would be handy, and as well as that, maybe focus on a more limited perspective, that being the relationship between Qui-Gon Jinn and Xanatos, as they uncover the conspiracy and turmoil on Telos 4. It was nice to see somewhat of what Telos was like as a culture, since KOTOR 2 mostly focused on the restoration of the planet between Zerka and the Ithorians.